Hey, I'm Dylan. I'm Scott's son, also known as Jack Dillard in the Joe Dillard series.
Hi, I'm Cody. I'm Scott Pratt's daughter. And I would be Lily, but there are some. She is me and she is not.
And I'm Jess. I'm not related, totally normal person, and I'm reading these books for the very first time. This is Scott Pratt versus Joe Dillard, the podcast, a behind-the-scenes look at the best-selling Joe Dillard series. Okay, so part 3 of the book, which is technically episode 4 because we split part 2 into 2 parts. I gotta say, I was intrigued up to this point. I was enjoying it, loving reading the book. But this really sealed the deal for me, and I have been super excited to record this one, so much so that I'm worried about spoiling the ending for the listeners.
Well, spoilers ahead.
We have to put a spoiler alert at the beginning of this podcast because I do want to talk about it, but then I was like, but I don't want people to not read it because we tell them the ending,
Yeah. Well, I don't know though. I guess that's kind of the gist of this podcast. You know what I mean?
That's true.
That is kind of the gist. Yeah. So hopefully you guys are reading along and we're not spoiling anything.
I know, because it's funny. I've had a few people tell me they're listening to the podcast, but they haven't read the book, and I'm like, are you that's weird to me. Are you following along? Do you plan on reading it? For people like that, I'm like, oh, I don't want to spoil the ending. If you're, I want you to read the book. I prefer you'd read the book.
Okay, stop what
so
you're
if you
doing.
haven't, yes, stop what you're doing. Go read the book right now. Come back and listen to this episode so that we don't spoil it for you. But I really feel like a lot of those loose threads obviously came together in the last part of the book, and it made me, I think the way that your dad kind of brought them all together in the last chapter is just the chef's kiss, the cherry on top. It's so good that I immediately was like, I just want to reread it. That's how good it was. It
was very fulfilling.
I'm thinking of the word kismet. What is that?
Kismet, that's fate. Another word for fate.
Okay, so maybe not kismet.
No, no, it does vary though. You and Dad, I feel like was always exceptional at this in all of his books, but even just going back and reading it again, I felt this. It's a really good, really, I don't know, eating a nice meal or something. At the end, where you're just that feeling of fulfillment, and because there are a lot of books and a lot of movies, a lot of stories that you get into and you get to the end, and I feel like there's something to be desired. You know what I mean? When you finish, it's there are a couple things that just didn't quite get there for me. But Dad's books, and obviously we're extremely biased, but I always just felt this really intense satisfaction when I finished his books because I didn't have any questions. I felt like, everybody sort of got what they deserved, and I just felt really good about it. And yeah, I know
it kind of comes full circle. Cody's going to be thinking of this word the rest of this podcast. And we're going to get to the very end of this, and Cody's going to be like, ah! She's going to figure the word out. That's hilarious. So no, but I will say, and we talked about, potentially doing a recap episode of the whole book, which I still think we should do, because I think going back, now that I know the ending, I think it'd be interesting to go back and talk about the story as a whole. Obviously, it's kind of funny to me because you guys this whole time have known the ending, and I haven't because, I haven't read the book.
I honestly didn't remember the ending until now, but he probably did.
Yeah, I remembered it. I've always known the ending, but there's no substitute for actually going back and rereading the book, and it's like we talked about. This is my first time going back and reading Dad's books since he passed away, so it's Yeah, I mean, there were just so many things, just the little nuances and the little details, and just even the dialogue, like the way things got tied up. I mean, I find myself, I'm kind of in awe again. I'm like, just gosh, old man, you were really, really good at this. You know what I mean? He just
I wanted to keep listening. I mean, even audibly, I don't know. There was something really personable and really warm about it.
Yeah, I think your dad like really swung for the fences on this one, and he knocked it out of the park. Like it's like this is your first. It's like his first at bat, and he just like grand slam where you're like, what the heck? Like,
yeah. Well,
does it make you wonder what hidden talents you have hidden that you just haven't tried, you haven't explored?
Not really. No, yeah. I hope there's some stuff in there. Yeah, Dad used to try to challenge me to write, and I just always would fight him tooth, claw, and nail on that. No, but one thing I was about the book, like just going back through and rereading it, I'm really struck by just his voice again. It's kind of something we talked about too. But his books, they feel so honest. You know what I mean? Like the writing and the characters. I never. And I mean, heck, I was around when he's going through like developing this fiction, which, by the way, real quick to your point, he did hit it out of the park. But I do remember it took him. How many times did he rewrite this book?
Well, and this book had so many versions too.
Yeah, well, I just remember it was a whole thing because this book, like it there was a lot of evolution between the first drafts and what we're reading now. And even, even since the book was published by Penguin, once Dad got the rights back and once we decided to publish it ourselves, Dad decided that I would say that the Penguin version of the book was rated R. And the book that we self-published was more PG-13. There used to be a lot of F-bombs and different stuff because that was just.
He didn't need it.
Yeah, I mean it was the book used to be a lot edgier. He just he said, man, I'm just not gonna. I don't want to ever get another email from a reader that I lost just because I dropped an F-bomb. And for a lot of people. And I'm not, and he, I mean, don't get me wrong, like he was not exactly shy about using that word, but generally speaking, he just said, I don't want to take anybody out of the story, and if that's something, and that'll take them out, then I'm going to change some of those F-bombs to
rats.
Yeah, darn. You know what I mean?
I don't think he'd put rats in the book.
Yeah, I don't think he put rats in the book either. But he also, took out some of the more gratuitous scenes. Or they weren't gratuitous, but he felt like it really was. It was like he molded it from an R-rated book to sort of a PG-13 book. Because obviously the subject matter is still very dark.
Yeah, for sure.
But that was. But anyway, just going back through, kind of to circle all the way back to the original point. Dad just had this amazing ability as a writer to just feel so authentic and honest with all of his characters. I never feel like, at least me personally, and obviously with the bias, but when I'm reading his dialogue, like, to me, there's never really a false note. Like, I'm always like, yep, that's exactly what that character would say. Exactly what this character would say, So, anyway.
And he's so good. We'll talk a little bit about it, obviously, as we go through this, but there was something we talked about in a different part of the book that I kind of said was a little bit of a red herring. Or I was like, well, it could be, like, it's kind of alluding to this. And it would have been fine either way if it didn't have like a payoff. But there's definitely that moment where you're like, yep, that was like, that's why we needed that scene. And so I think we've talked about this in a few of the episodes before where there's not really like filler stuff. You know what I mean? Like everything has a purpose.
Yeah, he was like a surgeon. I think Dylan already said that. There was not going to be anything that didn't tie in.
Yeah.
Yeah, he and I think some of it he wanted to write things that he'd want to read. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it also too, and it kind of harkens back to his days as a journalist. You know, it's that those days. Here is your. This is how many column inches you have. You have to stay in this. So if you don't need it, get rid of it. And he was the same way as a writer. But he used to say, and maybe I've said this previously. I don't remember if I have or not. But he used to say. His job as a writer was to just get out of the way and just let the story tell itself to the reader. Not try to as much as he could. He tried not to inject his bias or his politics or there's some little things here and there, but as much as he could, he really tried not to preach at people. He just wanted to tell a good story and let that be that. He wasn't going to try to overdo it,
Yeah, for sure.
Culmination, denouement. Is denouement the word I was looking for?
Denouement. I think denouement, isn't that another word for the resolution? Like, you remember when we were in...
I think so.
Yeah, I remember learning that in like 10th grade literature. You remember when you'd have what was it, the chart? Like the beginning and the rising action and climax and all that. Yeah.
Well, I still don't know.
Cody with the fancy words.
I was trying to tell you. I still don't know if that's the word I was looking for.
I'm trying. Well, the last third of the book is 10 chapters that takes place over basically a week's worth of time, and most of it's actually one day. And it's just a freight train running towards the end, basically, once you get over here into part 3. So we ended the last section with Maynard dead, so one of his other clients, and then them attending Joe's mom's funeral. So real personal note on that. So the third part is really just the trial. Like we're jumping straight into, basically the resolve of, this case that he's been working on throughout the whole book. The big inciting action of the third act is Agent Landers gets an anonymous tip about the whereabouts of Earlene's red Corvette. So this red Corvette's been kind of like a thread through the whole thing. They've never been able to find it. They're like, if we can just find the car, I'm sure there will be evidence. So he follows the instructions. He finds the Corvette. He calls in a forensics team to kind of comb over the evidence. He through various phone calls and things finds out that the property that the Corvette was on is owned by Earlene and her late husband. But there's some pretty important information about this chapter that comes to light later. And what is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wrote it down. I thought it was really odd that she would tell one of her employees where she stashed the car,
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things that stuck out in my mind until the end, that I just wondered if it was going to be resolved, because Earlene definitely would not want that car to be found, you would think, after a murder. So why would she tell her employee when she's been so smart about everything? So,
right.
I don't know. I just wondered if it would get resolved. And another thing I did write down was about the roads and the way that he took to get up to this car, and how Dad was so specific on all the road names. I bet that it was real places and roads. Was this in Unicoi County?
Yeah, Unicoi County. It's Spivey Mountain Road off the Temple Hill exit. Yep.
Yeah, I just wondered if this property actually existed.
Yeah.
He's like, this is the barn from the book. There's a plaque on it, actually.
Yeah. No, I think, there are a lot of, probably 95% of the scenes in these books are real places, that Dad was actually, that he wasn't just conjuring them out of thin air. No, I think, this chapter, so I kind of remembered, I didn't remember some of the details, but I kind of remembered that this chapter and kind of how it went down and the way that this evidence was presented to Landers was really important. The key here is that the prosecution is desperate. they know that they don't have much at all, and desperate times obviously call for desperate measures. I guess we'll just say that Landers sort of skirted some of the rules and red tape that he's usually supposed to.
Yeah, and he didn't tell them that it was locked. He just wanted them to think that he did excellent police work.
Yes, exactly.
And at the beginning of the chapter, he's talking about his phone ringing, and it's a blocked number, and he goes on about how it's an idiot phone company, and what's the point in caller ID if you can block your phone number. And I think just at this point, him and Dillard are just so over it, and they're both so salty.
Yeah, nothing's going either of their ways at all. Like, they're just like, oh my gosh. And so that's the big thing about this chapter. I forgot to mention, Dylan, like you said, it is the day of the trial that he goes and finds this. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to trial, and he's still trying to find evidence.
Yeah, they call him to come up for jury picking, or I'm sure that's not what that's called.
Selection.
Yeah, it's just jury selection, I think.
Yes, jury selection. Thank you. And he doesn't tell them why. He just tells them he's not going to be there, and they're mad.
Yeah, so the big thing is that he didn't do it legally.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't find the evidence legally. So that's kind of
trespass,
the kind of big takeaway. Yes. So the next chapter is the jury selection, as Cody was saying.
The jury picking.
Yes, the jury picking. That's where they pick the jury. It's jury selection, and we hear the opening statements, right, from the prosecution and the defense. And I thought the thing that was fascinating to me, and I feel like if you've ever watched any sort of like fictional crime drama or whatever, I still am fascinated every time I hear it, the thought process behind choosing jurors.
Mm-hmm.
And I have secretly always wanted to be on a jury. Like, I am the only citizen of the United States that desperately wants to be called in for jury duty, and I've never been summoned.
Oh,
that makes me so mad.
Have you been summoned?
Yeah.
You've been summoned?
Yeah, so I got picked, but I got out of it.
How'd you get out of it?
So at the time when I got picked, we were living in, I guess we were living in Sullivan County.
Oh, was that Piney?
Yeah, when we were in Piney. Is that Sullivan County or is that Carter County? Yeah, when we were in the compound.
Sullivan County, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it is Sullivan County. Anyway, so I got popped for a Sullivan County jury, but I had just moved and just gotten an apartment in Washington County, which is where we live now in Johnson City. So technically, I was no longer a resident of Sullivan County. And I called him up, and I made sure they knew that. And the guy just said, all right, yeah, go on. That's fine. And he marked me off the list or whatever. But
that's so funny.
I have zero interest in sitting on a jury. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a little close-minded about it, I guess. I should want to do it because from like a civic duty standpoint, and it probably would be interesting, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. That's just... Yeah,
mine's not even a civic duty thing. I'm just like, I just want to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to be part of the process.
That just stresses me out so much. I mean, it's so much pressure. It's somebody's life.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
not
Cody,
always somebody's life, though.
You're 1/12 of the reason for that behind that, so you're fine.
Yeah.
You're not 100%.
What if everybody else has been paid off? What if you're the only one that's going to do the right thing?
Yeah, but I see. No, but
Cody's like, I'm going to have to take a stand against the 11 other jurors.
I would be the guy that ended up on a jury trial for like a DUI or something. You know, something that really wouldn't be. I mean, I guess that would still be interesting, but I just feel like that would be dry. Not to mention, I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit before, but I think kind of through Dad, I do not like being in courtrooms. I actually kind of hate it.
I mean, that makes sense. I don't have the same experience that you do.
Yeah. No, that it's almost it's borderline a phobia at this point.
Really?
Oh yeah, I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I just the smell. I'm telling you, it's a whole thing.
Okay, so yeah, the selection process is kind of cool in that they're not really trying to get a fair jury. They're trying to pick a jury that is more attuned to their needs. So they're trying to pick opposite people.
Right.
Yeah. You know, it's a I mean, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but a good way to think about it would be almost be like you're an actor putting on a play and you get to choose, have a hand in choosing your audience. You know what I mean? And, you know, obviously, even like the part where he's talking about, you know, he had kind of enlisted Caroline's help to sort of shape Angel's look, you know, where he wanted her to look like a scared, beautiful college student, I think is what it said. And, you know, that's exactly how she came across. It really is. It's a drama, you know, it's a drama. And those jurors are the audience. And in that way, you know, it's cool. Well, obviously you want to create the audience that is most likely to be sympathetic and to, you know, enjoy your particular version of the drama, you know.
How he takes the time to memorize each juror's names and how he puts his hand on Angel's shoulder to show that he is protective of her and how he's close to her. Every single little itty bitty thing, like body language, like things you wouldn't think of.
It's like crafting a script. Like you were crafting a narrative and you were filling in, like, the visual cues all play into it. Like, I would imagine that the visual nature of everything plays into it more than people would care to admit.
Well, we're all human beings. I think that, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all judge a book by its cover. Yeah. You know, at some level, we're just programmed that way. One other like little note on this too, just to bring up, was that Deacon Baker has miraculously stopped showing up. And he's not there anymore. I just thought it was funny because that, you know, obviously that signifies that he's dissociating himself from the case because he thinks it's a loser, and that Martin is going to end up probably being the sacrificial lamb. And Dad says in here, if Martin loses this trial, he'll be hustling divorce cases next week, which from...
Yeah, this is supposed to be the big bell cow for Deacon Baker. Like, this is like the big... He had it scheduled right before the election. Like, this was supposed to be the big thing, and now it's, like, awful.
Yeah, now he's running away from it as fast as he can. But the whole thing, I think is just... It's funny, too. I remember Dad... He didn't have many divorce cases when he was a lawyer, but I remember him talking about divorce cases like it was basically hell on earth. Like it was the worst. Yeah, he said, man, you want to see like the worst in humanity, like get involved in divorce cases, because it is. He just used to say it was absolutely brutal.
This chapter shows how much you have to be a performer. As soon as he walks into that room, you have to project and you have to be on. You have to think of every little thing you do and every little thing you say, how your client looks. It's all a show. And if you're not a performer, you're going to lose.
It's all a show. Yeah.
I also like that Dillard is this is a real strategy, by the way, but a part of his strategy in the trial is to sort of put Reverend Tester on trial and deflect attention away from Angel by using the much like the famous Chewbacca defense, the some bitch deserved it defense.
Yes. Why is that a Chewbacca defense?
That was a random South Park reference, actually. But yeah, no, it was. But Dad, I think that's a real defense in like legal circles where, you know, maybe somebody's guilty, but of a crime, but whatever crime they perpetrated, whoever was the victim of the crime kind of deserved what happened. And I'm not even saying necessarily murders, just like anything, you know. But yeah, I'd kind of forgotten that that was a big part of his strategy going back through it.
It's super smart because, like, you know, the prosecution wants you to feel bad for the victim, right? Like, that's the whole point. And if you can paint the victim in a different light, then it's all, I mean, I feel like so much of being on a jury is just, I feel like probably most people don't use logic and reason. That a lot of it has to be emotion based, which is why, like, when he's talking about how he picks the jurors, it's all about emotions and preconceived notions. It's not about, like, are they wise? Are they going to, you know, take every fact into consideration? It's like, no, I want women who are going to sympathize with her and guys who think she's pretty. And you know what I mean? Like, this idea of, like, so much of it is already your preconceived notion. And so if you can paint the victim in a bad light, you kind of start sympathizing with the defendant because you're like, well, I mean, if she did it, like, maybe it was self-defense. Like, maybe it was, you know, like, I think there's so much of that. I totally agree with you, Dylan. Like, so much of it is that, which is why I said in my notes, I was like, you go, Joe. That was quite the opening statement because he crushes it.
Yeah.
He does. He just, like, lays it all out there and you're like, that is why he's so good at what he does, you know?
Yeah, that's how Dad was.
Yeah, it's a really good chapter because it shows you how smart of a lawyer he is. It really does.
Yeah, that's another thing too. God, like he was so good at writing trial scenes, which obviously, you know, he had real experience, but I think this too. Just going back through and read it. I mean, again, kind of speaking to authenticity, you know, and like the way Dad wrote, everything felt super honest. I mean, I just like reading these exchanges and these statements and Martin's statements and Dillard's statements, like all this stuff in the trial. I mean, I can see this trial 100% happening in my mind's eye, like clear as day.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, it was a really good chapter. I've read it a bunch of times, but...
Well, I think this just goes into Dad's brain a little bit, that Joe isn't in a good place at this time. His mom just died. A lot of stuff's been going wrong. He got run off the road, but when he's doing something that he's good at, it's time to be on, and he's a professional at it.
Yeah, right. And he's been prepping the trial. Like, he's been working on it, you know?
Yeah. And you know, too... Yeah. I kind of thought about this. My mind's in a special place tonight. So you know the movie 8 Mile, where Eminem is, like, in the last rap battle, like the way he wins it is by kind of insulting himself. So the guy he's rapping against has nothing to say. So. It was funny because, you know, when Dillard's kind of going down the checklist of what their evidence is, which is basically squat, he said the only thing they really have is my sister, who is a drug addict who is in jail because she stole from me, and I had her arrested, you know. And so it was like he kind of...
took it out from under them.
Yeah, he almost got out in front of it, which I was like, I've seen that strategy before.
He's saying we have our own issues, and he's almost accepting blame for them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't let him use it against him, like, which is awesome. So speaking of his sister, the next chapter, the first witnesses in the case are called. So it's the same day. They pick the jury in the morning. It's the afternoon. You know, the trial starts. The first witnesses are called. We go through a little bit of the trial part of it in the first part of the chapter, but I love it because Joe is just demolishing Martin's story on all of his cross-examines of all of the witnesses. Like, he's just ripping him to shreds, and it's awesome. You're like, yes, keep doing it. Call another witness so Joe can freaking rip him to shreds. Again, like, just back-to-back chapters where you're like, man, he knows his stuff. Like, he knows what he's doing.
They don't have anything. I mean, they don't have anything. Nobody saw her do any of it. They didn't see her walking into the hotel. I mean, the lady that is testifying, it's like, could you even tell when it was raining if she was a female?
Yeah. She's like, I don't know. I was watching my show.
I was watching Leno.
Yeah. Like, and it's like, that's the kind of stuff that it like shows you how terrible of a lawyer Martin is, because I'm like, why didn't you prep your witness that those kind of questions are going to be asked, or like figure out like, oh, she wasn't actually looking. Maybe don't put her on the stand. Like, it's like terrible, prep of the witness on his part.
Well, but Dillard does say too that I think isn't this Martin's first jury trial?
Oh, is it? I must have missed that.
I want to say because he was the sacrificial lamb for Baker, but I do think he said some things early on where it was kind of to the effect of he didn't make some of the mistakes that Green could embarrass him for making that I thought he would make, even doing like the voir dire and picking the jury and stuff like that. I think that was maybe a part of it too.
That's true. He's kind of new to the game.
Yeah. This is his first rodeo.
Yeah, Deacon literally threw him to the wolves.
Well, and I think too, like, a strategy, I would assume, being a lawyer, is to make the opposing lawyer look incompetent. So that it doesn't really matter. Like, if you can make him look incompetent at the beginning part of the trial, pretty much anything he does after that, the jury's going to be like, yeah, but really? So I think he kind of... like, Joe draws first blood and he doesn't give up. Like, it's like, I'm going to keep attacking this, narrative that they're building with all of these witnesses that they're bringing in, because it's not really true. And these aren't solid witnesses, so they're like,
Well, their big card is his sister, who they're not bringing in until the end, and which we already know isn't even true. I mean, Landers, from the very beginning, wrote her statement for her.
Yeah, all the witnesses have really established at this point is that somebody got murdered. I mean, it's like a crime happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it happened. I don't know who did it, but it happened.
Yeah.
So the big thing that happens in this chapter, though, is that Deacon Baker and Agent Landers show up and request to speak to the judge in his chambers, right? So they're in the middle of this trial. They come in. They basically think they're like, this is it. Like, we know who did it because they found the red Corvette. It's on Erlene's property. There's evidence in it. This is, whatever. We have to dismiss this case because we got to try Erlene. So they tell him about the evidence. They ask for a week. Well, I guess they don't know yet. They are assuming based on the information. They ask for a week's recess so that they can get the lab results back. So they sent in lab, the sciencey stuff from the evidence. They send it into the lab to confirm that it is Erlene's car, that the evidence is that there's DNA, of John Tester and all this stuff in there. But if the tests are positive, they say they'll drop the charges against Angel Christian and arrest Erlene Barlow. And the judge agrees to the week recess, but basically tells them like, if we don't have results back by next Monday, I'm moving forward with the trial. Like, I'm not waiting for you. I'm sure he's like so annoyed that, who finds evidence on the first day of the trial and is like, wait, hold on, we were wrong. It's somebody else. We think. We don't know yet because we got to get the lab results back.
Well, and I don't know when it happens, but Judge Green at some point is just like, this is ridiculous. You guys are a mess. Pull yourselves together.
Pull yourselves together, man. So that's the big thing in that. Just how stupid do they look right now? Like, Landers and Baker, I'm just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Well, it's interesting though, and this is one thing I've thought about too. murders happen where there's just not much evidence. You know, I'm sure that kind of stuff happens all the time. And, you know, for obvious, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that, you know, if you're going to put somebody in jail for a really long time or for the rest of their lives, I mean, you got to know without a shadow of a doubt that they did whatever you're accusing them of doing. But I do think that I mean, obviously the DNA stuff and the technology is changing and evolving all the time, and it's enabling law enforcement to gather more evidence. But I mean, I'm sure there are a ton of murder cases where there's just not that much evidence. I mean, all the way around, there's probably just not that much.
I mean, if you don't have a murder weapon, if you don't have a body, if nobody saw a person go in or out.
Yeah, and there's not just, and even the DNA, you know, the DNA is on his person. He could have easily picked that up at the club. I mean, it really, the way it's written, you almost feel bad for him, because it's like, you know, there just really wasn't. I mean, they're just they're presenting what they had to go on, you know.
Right.
But yeah, it does definitely feel like, yeah, if I'm a judge and you come running in and it's like you've had all this time, you're really gonna drop this on me right now.
Right.
You know, I could, just knowing how judges are, I'm surprised they even gave him the week. You know what I mean?
It's like, can I have an extra week to finish my homework? Like, is it okay if I turn it in next Monday?
Yeah, so I thought it was odd when I went back in this chapter in the trial, it comes up that the murder was on the morning of da-da-da-da-da. And it was April 11th, which was Mom and Dad's anniversary. And then the ending days of this book, like I think the trial, are July 24th and 25th, which July 25th is my birthday. So I just thought it was kind of odd that he like set the book by dates
he could remember.
Yeah, and you know, like the murder was on their anniversary, which is really romantic.
Oh, that is funny. That is interesting.
Yeah.
That they're dates that mean something to him, obviously.
Well, I'll tell you that, you know, the whole date thing, when you're actually writing a book, when you start putting dates on chapters, like actual months and dates, it makes things really difficult, because you have to keep it all tight. Because we had one time, I want to say maybe it was the eighth Dillard book, where he did like calendar dates, and while he was writing the book, he screwed one up, and it
Are
screwed.
You serious?
Yeah, he screwed one up, and he screwed the dates up. So it ended up every date after that was wrong, and it fell on all these wrong days. So
well, they celebrate his birthday in this book. So going forward, like in the eighth book, you have to remember in your fictional world, like when his birthday was in the first book, or any date that you put in.
It gets really sticky, but yeah, we ended up luckily in that particular case, we caught it, and then we were able to go back and fix it. But it was kind of a nightmare, because just logistically going back through and figuring out the timeline.
I'm sure.
But yeah, anyway, I think that he actually, after that time in the eighth book, he told me, he's like, I am never don't ever let me do dates again.
Don't date the book ever again. This is so dumb.
Out. Everything is just
hilarious.
Like chapter 1, chapter 2. I'm done with this.
It was great. It was a great idea at the beginning. Okay, so in the next chapter, obviously they exit the judge's chambers. They go back out into the courtroom. Agent Landers goes straight over to Earlene Barlow and basically threatens her. And which I'm like, dude, are you so dumb? Why would you do that? Like, why would you show your hand? Agent Landers is all over the place.
He's just dumb.
Yeah, and then Dillard goes to meet with Deacon Baker. He offers to drop the charges if Angel will cooperate in convicting Earlene. Dillard says he's like, I make no promises, but I'll go talk to my client. And then he goes to talk to Angel, and he tells her what's on the table. And this is where things get interesting. So she starts sobbing and says she can't help convict Earlene Barlow because, drum roll, she freaking did it. She's not actually innocent. And I was like, my brain was about to explode. I was like, okay, so what actually happened. So we get the real story. We've been waiting the whole book for the real story, right? So we're like, what actually happened?
I guess we should have said spoiler alert right before you said that.
We gave them a spoiler alert at the beginning of the episode. That one's on you. If you heard that and you didn't want to hear it because you haven't read the book, that one's on you. Shame on you for listening. How dare you? No, I'm just teasing. As it turns out, what was supposed to happen was... There's a lot of things that did happen that people said happened. So it's like people were telling the truth. So she told the Reverend to go back to his hotel, grab some money, that Angel would come over and basically sleep with him, whatever. And she was trying to teach him a lesson, basically, and was like, hey, don't be that guy. You know what I'm saying? So... She wanted to drug him and rob him and basically use Angel as bait as a way to get back at him for what he did to her.
Just to like drugging and robbing.
Nothing real bad. And instead, he ended up assaulting her in the hotel room and doing some awful things to her. And she retaliated by stabbing him a ton of times. So it was self-defense. But... It literally was like, okay, so the whole chapter, this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where there's like this red herring where he talks to the psychiatrist and he's like, I mean, it could happen where she could have a psychotic break because of things that have happened in her past. And she almost has like an out-of-body experience where she loses it and kills a guy because of something he did. And there's that moment where you read that in the chapter where you're like, that's kind of the moment when you're reading it where you're like, I don't know, did she do it? I guess she could have done it. And then you're like, no, she didn't do it. She's too innocent. Like, it's not her. And then this comes back around. And the way she describes it, she does describe it as this like out of body experience where she's like watching herself do it. And it's because of all the awful things that happened to her in her past.
Yeah,
and
she went to the same place that she went to when she was sexually abused.
Yes.
It was like a place outside of her body where she was almost floating above herself.
Yeah. So this is the big bomb drop of a chapter where you're like, oh my gosh, this whole thing is called an innocent client. And the whole freaking time you think, oh, she's innocent. And then you find out, no, she's really not. She did it. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? So now it's awful because, they think they have this evidence. They want her to help them convict Erlene, but she knows Erlene didn't do it. And so they're really in a pickle now. But the problem is that they're probably not going to convict her in this trial because there really isn't any evidence. It's like this weird thing where it's like, all the evidence points to Erlene, but she didn't actually do it. So it is super interesting. They mentioned Double Jeopardy, which I love, and is also a great movie starring Ashley Judd.
That is a great movie. I love that movie.
Such a good movie. But basically the idea of Double Jeopardy is you can't be charged for the same crime twice. So yeah, that's the big thing with this chapter is we find out she's not innocent.
So she confessed is the big thing. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say something. It was big. It wasn't really big. It really wasn't big. But, one of the big things with Dillard's hesitation to thinking that she did it or didn't do it was that she's so small. Or, like, how would she take on this giant of a man? And he was already, so he punched her and incapacitated her, turned her over and sexually abused her, and then immediately after went and drank from the drugged liquor that Erlene gave her. So he was incapacitated by the time that she came to, saw the knife on the table, which was his, and then had her break down and killed him. So so there was no manhandling on her part.
Right. Yeah. He was drugged, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and kind of just to your point there a second ago, too, Earlene, and as we've sort of seen, she's been the ventriloquist with all of this stuff, and so even though she didn't do it, it totally seemed like she did it because she set this whole thing up.
Which her sending Angel up there thinking that she was just going to be able to go into this room with this man alone and that he just happened to take a drink first thing. Like that, to me, that did play as a little naive.
Well, but
and that she was a little, not like she made him do that to Angel,
risky.
but it did seem a little like naive of her.
Definitely risky, but in her defense, this guy, he's supposed to be a man of the cloth. And I mean, obviously he's well off the reservation anyway, but I mean, who could ever think that somebody in that position is capable of doing what he did? And especially like the sexual stuff, the violence. So, I just don't think that there was any part of her that could have imagined a world where, well, obviously either one of them would have gone that far, but the Reverend first, I mean, she thought there was just going to be a quick little hustle and that would be that.
Well, and I kind of feel like this probably wasn't the first time she's done that.
Right.
Probably.
Right.
So this wasn't the first time Earlene had that idea. Like she was like, oh.
Well, and you just see how rocked why this throws Joe into such a tailspin is because he wants to know and he wants to be there for this girl, and it throws him back to what happened to his sister.
Right.
And it's just this as he says, this beautiful, innocent girl gets assaulted, gets punched in the face, then sexually assaulted, and that she had to go through that, and she should have killed him, but now he's in this position of he can't put her on the witness stand, and her lie and him knowingly not say anything. He at this point does not want her to go to jail at all.
Right. And he's like, I think he definitely feels like she was justified, but it's also doesn't make her not guilty.
Not guilty, yes. So he's terrified now of how to go about this.
Because doesn't he in the chapter 2 kind of stop her and say I don't want to know this?
He does it first, and then she just really wants to tell him. I don't know if at the end if he tells her to stop with anything else, but
yeah,
I think at the beginning he's kind of like, ooh, don't tell me because if you do, I'm liable. And then she kind of
he can see that she needs
can see that she needs to get it off her chest, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And tell somebody.
Yeah, no, it really
and who else is she gonna tell?
Old Joe.
Yeah.
And I think it is almost like PTSD. It kind of throws him back in time to what happened to him and
that
his
actually
sister.
launches into the next chapter. But before we move on to that, there's a really, really great line from this chapter when he's talking to Deacon Baker that I loved so much that I wrote it down. But after Deacon Baker kind of gives him the lay of the land of hey, so we'll drop the charges against Angel, the whole thing if she'll cooperate with us. And then he kind of sits back and he's like, interesting dilemma. And he's like, Joe Dillard goes, for you, I'm still in the same boat, innocent client. And I'm like, it's so great. Because it's he thinks Deacon Baker thinks that he's backed Joe into this corner, and Joe's like, nope, I still have an innocent client, which is really funny when you realize that he's about to go talk to Angel, where she tells him, I am not innocent. So
but
he's
in his mind, she almost still is, in a weird way. He does also in this chapter ask why she cut off the Reverend's penis.
She says, I didn't do it.
She says, I didn't do that. And so that's another little conundrum at the end of the chapter where she's like, why would I not tell you?
Well, if you didn't, who did?
Yeah, I mean, she's told everything else. Why would that be the one thing she doesn't remember doing,
Right. But like you said, I think it's a lot of PTSD for Joe. The pressure really starts getting to him, and that leads to the next chapter where he goes home and he takes it out on Caroline.
And the whole lead up to this scene, everything about it was so real. This is the mode that Dad would go into sometimes when he was in a bad place, where he just worked up a mad on the way home, a way to somehow turn it.
I think I've said this on the podcast, before, but when he was in this mindset, I swear, like it was almost like the Force, like he affected the air around him. Like you could feel
as
it.
soon as you saw
It's
him
almost
walk.
like before you even saw him, like you could tell, like the energy had changed in the area.
You could
know?
feel it coming, right?
Yeah, it's just like, oh gosh, something's wrong. You know?
Yeah, and he's just like, he's really in a bad place because he can't really tell anybody about it, but he has to like hold it inside. It's a lot of information to really take in at one time.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I think, like you said, Cody, like it's taken him back to like what happened with his sister, like growing up, and he feels like responsible that he didn't like fix that situation then. So he feels responsible of like fixing the situation now, even though he can't do anything about it. So he comes home, he like takes it out on Caroline because who else is there to take it out on? Nobody. And she just won't stand for it. She's like, nope, we're not having any of this. So he's like, fine. So he leaves, he goes to a bar, he gets super drunk, and then drives to a cemetery to visit his father's grave. It's a veteran cemetery, I think.
Yeah.
He passes out there and he has a dream about his time in the military in Grenada. And it's a really unsettling dream where he basically kills 6 Cuban soldiers and then goes over to them and like rolls one over with his foot and discovers that it has his face. Basically, like the soldier looks like him. And he screams, which kind of leads into the next chapter, but it wakes him up. Like there's a guy there and his friend Jerry finds him laying on the ground in the cemetery and calls Caroline and drives him home, right? So all this kind of goes together. Caroline kind of like pokes and prods him about like, what is going on, man? Like, and he finally opens up and he tells her everything, like everything that he's never told anybody, everything about his past. And in his words in the book, he says, finally lets Caroline all the way in and they reconcile. He has a line in there that says, after it was all over, I understood the power of confession. This is kind of the 2 chapters that I would say kind of, well, to some degree, wrap up Joe's like personal storyline in the book of like, this is like all the things that have been tormenting him that you've kind of seen, you know, strands of throughout the book. It all kind of culminates in these 2 chapters of if his relationship with Caroline, and you see it very, you know, represented in that way. And I thought it was an interesting couple of chapters. You get kind of an insight to his military background. I know that he brings it up here and there throughout the book, but this is the most specific it gets in the book about where he served and what he was doing and things like that. And he's clearly haunted by it. And that part of it maybe isn't necessarily resolved. And I don't even know if he said this earlier in the book, but I don't even think he probably did and I just forgot. But I didn't even know that Caroline didn't know about the whole Sarah situation.
Yeah. Well, so these 2 chapters, I feel like, to the core, most get to who Dad was. Like what he struggled with, his issues. Like this is where writing was really, really therapeutic for him. Because first of all, like so much of it was we knew like him working himself up on the way home, talks about his irrational anger. Like he gets out of the car, and this was one of the markers. You knew when Dad got home if he was really mad at Rio. We really had a dog named Rio who would pee on your shoe.
Yeah.
If Dad like snapped at him, you knew it wasn't a good day. Like you knew that Dad was not in a good place. And as soon as he starts, he's like, smelled broccoli. I hate broccoli, you know, and it just, every little thing. And Dad it said, you know, when I get in a funk or a depression, or I'm having an off day, I can tell I'm having an off day and I'm not doing great, but it's like vague little things. And I try to find out why, or I'm like, am I really in a bad mood? Is something under it? Dad's moods like this were very physical and intense. Like he said, pressure at my temples, field of vision narrowing.
Yeah, tunnel vision.
Yeah, tunnel vision. And, you know, I think that this some of it was PTSD, which he did struggle with in real life, with his service years and with some other things. But I do think that some of this also went in with his being bipolar. I don't know. I've never experienced, and I don't know about you, I've never had my field of vision narrow when I've gotten so angry. I've never experienced that. I've maybe had some pressure in my temples when I have never physically experienced that type of emotion, and I think that's what he really experienced all the time.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the only time I've ever been even close to that kind of angry was when Dad would make me that angry.
Yeah.
He was the only person that could make me that angry.
He was the source, and
he was the only person that could make me that angry. But
that's hilarious.
No, I can. So Cody's spot on. Like all these chapters are very. They hit very close to home. This is where the lines between Joe Dillard and Scott Pratt very much blur, and in a lot of ways really cease to exist, because we were obviously Joe served in he was a ranger in Grenada. Dad was in the Air Force and he was in Korea, and we Dad did not like to talk about the military stuff, but there was some really, really bad stuff in there that I won't go into too much detail about on here.
We had years where he had dreams about.
He had flashbacks.
Flashbacks.
He would wake up in the middle of the night speaking, or he'd be speaking Korean in the middle.
Oh my gosh!
In the middle of the night, because he learned. Dad was he excelled in everything he did. So when he joined the military, he got identified as special very quickly, and they sent him to the language school and taught him Korean. But what was wild, though, was that he didn't remember, when he was awake and sober, it's like he had blocked that out of his mind. He didn't remember any Korean, but he would have nightmares,
oh my gosh,
where he would flash back and be speaking Korean.
That's crazy.
Oh, it was nuts. So that was very real. A lot of so we always knew Dad growing up dealt with PTSD and depression. The bipolar stuff, we actually didn't know he was full-blown bipolar until I guess we were in college, I think.
Yeah.
But basically, anyway, a lot of so Dillard very much became an outlet for a lot of this stuff. And obviously, it makes great drama, It's amazing, really, that Dad could do what he was able to do. But that's what I was really struck by, or I was really struck by going back through this is, a lot of this stuff is just straight up autobiographical,
And Caroline, our mom, totally would have said the words, "I won't be your whipping girl."
Yeah.
When he just pisses her off and she breaks because
their fights were epic.
And she totally would have just snapped like that.
Yeah.
And then he leads, which I do think Dillard probably left a little quicker than Dad would have. He was a little more restrained. He would sometimes.
But Dad would do that too.
Yeah.
When we were younger, when he was in a really bad place, he would do that. He would disappear, and he would be out bar hopping and just basically drinking himself into oblivion.
And I do vaguely remember Dad. Did he pass out on his father's grave? One time?
Yeah, that actually happened. He had a really strained relationship with his dad, so. Yeah, all this stuff is all real Scott Pratt stuff, which is just when you read about it, it's it's just God, I think us being his kids, he was our dad, so obviously he was sort of almost. It was like a heroic persona in our eyes in a lot of ways. But just reading this stuff, it's I even now I think back, it's I really took for granted how much baggage Dad was carrying around with him, like
at all times,
all time, like every single day.
Well, and just
like reading about this character dealing with it, this fictional character. I'm like, God, this poor guy. And then I was like, oh no, yeah, Dad's fine. Dad's normal.
Pull it together, Dad.
Pull
Come
it together.
on.
Get it together. But
yeah. Well, and then in the chapter after that, where he does speak to Caroline, I was blown away by. I think a lot of the time when we were frustrated with Dad when he was in these, and he just seemed so irrational. You didn't think he really had any clarity into his own actions or what he was doing. And then reading this and just it struck so true when he talks about, like, he's so terrified to talk to Caroline about this stuff because she might perceive him as weak or flawed. And that was Dad's whole MO, was he was terrified that any of us, like, he had a really hard time admitting when he was having a hard time or talking about his feelings because he couldn't stand that we might think he was weak or that he was flawed. And Dillard says this, and I think that this was Dad to a T, that she might realize that all along she'd been married to a scared little boy trying to prove to himself that he wasn't a coward. And that, honestly, sadly, to the core was Dad. I mean, his whole life was trying to prove that he was strong. He was not weak. I mean, it was such a big MO with him and with our family. He was so scared that we were going to think he was weak, and we never would have, ever. But it was because he couldn't see himself as weak.
Yeah.
And that part just hit me so hard reading that, because it's part of what was so heartbreaking about Dad is you just loved him so much and you wanted him to see himself clearly, and he just couldn't. I never once thought he was weak. Never.
Right.
And I never would have. And he just was constantly, and he would, when he'd get in these places, he would try to drive us, especially Mom, away because he didn't think he deserved her. So it was almost like try to get rid of her for her own good, get her to run away because he didn't deserve her.
Yeah.
He would do that.
No, a lot of this is real. Mom didn't know about a lot of this stuff, I think, until like years into their marriage. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, obviously didn't affect anything. She didn't care. Right. She loved him for him. But this was, there were, when we were young, I can kind of remember when some of this stuff was kind of coming out, it really was, it was really hard. But at the same time, I feel like Dad did better once he had really let Mom all the way in, just like Dillard had let Caroline all the way in.
Because she didn't leave him. And he was so scared that she would. That's why he wouldn't tell her. And of course she didn't. Of course she wouldn't. And I think that that always just kind of solidified a bit of self-worth for himself, or just the loyalty aspect of it, that we were never going to leave him. But he was so scared of so many things like that these two chapters were very hard-hitting in that way. They were very truthful in a way that I didn't always know that he was aware of.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And I love, too, though, he goes through all that stuff, really dives deep, peeling the onion, really getting into the layers, and then he ends it with... come over here and take a leak on my shoe. Talking to Rio, that's one thing I think too. That's,
I'm fine.
Yeah. Come pee on my shoe. But he, Dad's one of Dad's favorite authors was Mark Twain, so he always tried to make sure that even in all this really heavy, really deep stuff, he was always trying to inject at least some humor.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you get that a lot. I would say that's the case. Yeah, I thought those were really big insights into your dad, and I think even more, in the coming chapters as well. The next two chapters also kind of go hand in hand. So, chapter 49 is the next morning. It's Caroline and Joe discussing basically Joe's options with the trial. And Joe decides that the best course of action is to visit Sarah and make things right, and basically finally talked about what happened to her. So he's in the confessing mood and just getting things off of his chest. So he says, I think the best thing for me to do, and not just for the trial, but just for himself and for their relationship, is to just go make things right. And, you know, he tells Caroline, like, we never talked about it. Like, after it happened, like, with something we both know that happened, but we never talk about it. So it feels like, you know, this is something that I just need to do. And I think Caroline's acceptance of him kind of gives him the, you know, the gall he needs, the gumption to go and do this thing that's really hard that he's put off his whole life because he just doesn't know how to handle it. He doesn't know how to talk about it, and he feels bad because he didn't do what he thinks he should have done. He just feels really guilty about it, and so he kind of comes to terms with the fact that, like, no, I just got to go talk to her about it. So he does, and that's the next chapter. You know, he goes to see Sarah in prison to apologize, you know, for not doing something all those years ago. They both shed some tears and they reconcile. They spend an hour just talking, you know, about life, what happened to him, you know, what happened to her, like how much it affected her, and just basically was such a huge ripple effect on the rest of her life. And then they get around to kind of talking about her deal. So it's a signed agreement that she has to give, quote unquote, truthful testimony, and that's it. And Joe asks her what her testimony is going to be, and she gives kind of a little mischievous grin and says, will you make sure I get my deal? And he says, you bet your ass.
Yep.
So it's a little bit of a loophole in this contract that she signed with Agent Landers. But it is really it's a dual purpose chapter, but it's a really sweet chapter of reconciliation between, you know, brother and sister who have been, you know, tormented by one terrible incident, you know, 30 years prior to that. I love the brother-sister exchange and energy in this scene, you know, these two chapters that he writes. And it's kind of like I still got your back. Mm-hmm. You know, like you kind of screwed me over. I'm in prison, but I get it. You know, like I think she's mad at him, but she's not really mad at him. You know what I mean? Like she knows that he wouldn't have put her there if she hadn't done anything wrong. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of nice because they've been at odds this whole book, and it's finally a moment of like breakthrough between the both of them where they reconcile this unspoken thing that they've, you know, haven't talked about for 30 years. And because of that, they're able to kind of like join arms and go up against this prosecution together. And it's interesting because you don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Like you get the feel, like they don't talk in detail. Okay, well now what are we going to do? You just kind of have to wait and see, but you're like, oh man, something's going to happen. Like, and it's kind of exciting, but it's a good chapter. Like I really enjoyed that chapter because I think you're starting to like the chapters with Caroline and then this chapter with Sarah, like you're really getting through like the hard shell around his heart, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you're getting to like the inside, and it's like he really does love her, you know what I mean? Like, and he's kind of like, and I'm assuming as being his children, he's very much like a tough love kind of guy, you know what I mean? And in this case, like that's not what she needs. Yeah. You know what I mean? She doesn't, he's tried that multiple times. It hasn't worked. And so there's kind of he's kind of turned a new leaf. And so she gets to reap basically the benefits of that. It is a really, really nice scene. So
yeah, he was just so good at, you know, even though I don't think this particular conversation probably happened with his sister, but he just was so good at the realness of basic human interaction, you know, like just, and I even love how after they have like their breakdown and they're crying about it and they actually talk about it for the first time. It's like when we sat there talking for an hour and it was really stilted at first. You know, those little things that you don't really talk about with somebody that you're really close to. It would be awkward at first. They're not used to conversing because they've been holding each other at arm's length for years, you know, and just angry with one another. And I love that he was just able to capture moments like that.
Well, I love too, like after like they're hugging on the floor and she's like, geez, Joe, you're breaking my neck. Like, it's like, like there's like this like moment of levity, like you were saying, where they hugged for so long, but it was like, okay, like the tap out of like, all right, we've hugged for forever.
We've had our moment.
Yeah, we're good. I love you. Please stop hugging me. Because everybody kind of gets to that. So there is kind of like that moment of humor in there as well, which is really great. But
and again, it's a lot of the same stuff y'all have already spoken to. Dad was just a master of capturing human emotion and portraying very real dialogue. This scene, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times I read this scene, I feel it, man. Like I feel just the raw emotion, and so yeah, it's cool. But the other thing too, and all of this stuff, I'm always just the other thing I'm really struck by here is obviously I know how everything's going to work out, but it's just the dad's plotting, man. Like the way he sort of thought things through, and like how things are kind of working themselves out, even using her signed statement in the sort of loophole, for kind of what could potentially come, that's not convenient. I mean, I think when defendants, or not defendants, but when somebody specifically in that situation, that's what they would sign. It would say something that guarantees your truthful testimony, so I just once again, just all of it. I keep finding, every time I finish a chapter, really plug back into the book, I'm sort of in awe again, and I sort of kind of rediscover my appreciation for just how freaking talented Dad was as a writer, as a storyteller, and as a just every part. I mean, his plotting, his dialogue, his just the emotion. I mean, everything about his books. It just, I mean, again, biased, but I just love it. I just love it, and I just find myself just in awe. That's a good word. In awe again. Yeah.
For sure. All right, we got 3 chapters left in the book, and they are doozies. Let me tell you, because just when you think it can't get any crazier, it gets crazier. So the trial resumes a week after, the following Monday. Martin has a few more witnesses. Oh, the results haven't come in. So they continue on with the trial.
Yeah,
right? That's So Dillard cross-examines them all. And then finally the star witness, Sarah Dillard, gets on the stand. And she testifies to the truth. And the truth is that Landers wrote the statement, had her sign it, even though it was all a lie, and she apologizes, realizes that it was a mistake. So she does tell the truth, and the truth is that she didn't write it.
Yeah.
And it's not great for her because she's obviously saying, like, I lied, but the only stipulation of the contract of her getting out was that she tell the truth, even if it made her look bad. And so it's like the perfect, you're like, that's amazing. You know what I mean? Because it's like, she's like, yeah, I'll tell the truth. The truth is I didn't write it. And so then it makes that's like you said, like they were hanging the whole thing on this like testimony. And then she just comes out and she's like, no, I didn't do that. And how big of a deal that is, because it completely throws Martin off. He starts conferring with Landers to try and save face. He asks Judge Green to strike her testimony from the record.
Well,
Green
he tries
gets super
to attack
sassy
her and be like, "Will you expect us to trust the word of a convicted thief, lying felon?" And she's like, "Well, you didn't seem to have an issue with that when you wanted me to lie for you, so I don't know why you'd have an issue now." Which I just thought
absolutely
was
so great. Like the way it's like, it's so good. But Green gets sassy with Martin, and he's like, "No. this is like, you're the one who called her to the stand, so her testimony stands. And then he asked Dillard if he wants to cross-examine her, and he's like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So Dillard cross-examines her to further solidify the reasons why she may have signed it. And it's like, the writing's phenomenal. It's like it's like the perfect, like, you're like, they're totally on a brother-sister brainwave right now. Like, they're like just in sync, you know what I mean? Like, she knows exactly what he's trying to get her to say. Mm-hmm. It's perfect. And then he has the jury right where he wants them. So he has all these witnesses lined up, you know, for the defense, because his prosecution rests, which, what a terrible way to end your prosecution. Like, yeah, no, judge, we don't have any more witnesses. That's that's all we got.
As a matter of fact, we're not really sure why we did this.
Yeah. You know what? I don't really even know why we're here. So Dillard, he's like, the jury is right where we want them, so I don't need any witnesses. So he decides not to call any witnesses of his own, which to me is like such a badass move. Mm-hmm. Like, all of your witnesses were so terrible that we don't even need witnesses of our own to testify to her innocence. Like,
yeah, this is
you
a very
were so
mic
terrible.
drop moment.
It's a huge mic drop moment. Like, just
the defense.
Yeah. And like I wrote down, I said, Dillard then decides against any witnesses of his own and has the defense rest with that bad taste left in the jury's mouth. They come back really quickly, no shock to the audience, that they find her not guilty, because basically they didn't have any evidence, you know, supporting their case. So it's a really, really great, again, I think, you know, Dylan, to your point, like, shows the craftiness of your dad and like just how smart he is, you know, like how he goes in there and it's like, you know, me not being a lawyer, I'd be like, well, crap, you signed a contract. Like, you can't get out of it. You know what I mean? And he's like, no, let's look at the loopholes. You know, it just says you have to tell the truth. So just tell the truth, you know? And I just think it's really, really, it's so smart. Like, it's such a smart move, and it's so good.
Well, it really was kind of like lazy on Lander's part. Like, she never even spoke to her. So even if they win it, because you know there's probably going to be some sort of investigation into this because of Landers. Like, on the police side of it, they're probably going to investigate into it to see if he did this illegally. And it's not like he even made sure that she spoke to her at some point or another. She never even spoke to her. You know, if you went to the other prisoners who would be like, oh, yeah, I saw him talking, you know, nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's kind of the same thing. It's you know, well, Landers was really desperate. You know, he was backed into a corner, and, you know, desperate times, desperate measures, right? I mean, especially once Julie Hayes ended up mysteriously passing away.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have anything, and you know, it had already been established that Landers was willing to bend or break the rules, which, you know, he did,
right? Obviously,
in this case, but I think is another thing too, and that was sort of another way that Dad. It's almost getting more true as time goes, but I mean, it seems like every other week there's a new documentary on Netflix where there are police officers or investigative just agents or whatever that have done exactly this sort of thing. You know, I think both sides, you know, and even part of, kind of to speak to your point earlier too, you know, defense lawyers, a lot of times their clients, I think, are absolutely guilty. Their job is to find loopholes and figure out ways to sort of get a little bit of leverage on the prosecution and either get things pleaded down to a much lower offense or get them dismissed altogether. So it's just sort of a really good picture, like, of the justice system. It's not this, you know, cookie cutter, beautiful, black and white, perfect thing. It's both sides. You know, the defense lawyers are looking for loopholes and willing to do whatever it takes to win, and so are the people on the other side. And not necessarily to the extent that Landers is in this case. But I mean, you see stuff like this all the time. Landers, their case was thin, but it didn't start out as thin. But
it ended up.
He really just ended up he was cornered and he was desperate and he just kind of. That's all. He didn't really have anything else he could do.
Well, and there's part of him that was just a little bit too happy about getting Dillard's sister to do it, just as like a little petty thing. So he didn't really probably do the work he should have done because he gets too emotionally tied to some of this stuff.
Yeah, and he's worried.
Never bet against blood. Come on, man. Yeah, it's the prosecution. It's the whole book is just the prosecution's case slowly unraveling into nothing. It's it gets to the end and you're like, wait, what? What was the thing up here at the beginning that made them arrest her? Because I'm not seeing it. It's really an embarrassment to them. But the next chapter, so she gets the not guilty verdict, which is so great for Angel, even though she did it. So that's a whole other thing, which I think is interesting in this chapter. He said, after the not guilty verdict is issued, people are celebrating in the courtroom. There's a moment where Joe looks at Angel and he has kind of a bittersweet feeling about it because, sure, she got off, but, Joe wonders kind of how it'll affect her for the rest of her life, basically knowing that she got away with murder. Mm-hmm. You don't just oh, they said not guilty, and then you never struggle with that again for the rest of your life. And so it's kind of this lingering thing where it's you're happy, but also she did do it. So there is a part of you that's I think it was justified, but how do you live with that the rest of your life that, especially with something like that, where it's this total out of body experience. I mean, it's not she just oh, I just shot him out of self-defense. She stabbed him a bunch.
Yeah.
And so I think but just your dad's credit of it's not this everything's wrapped up in a bow at the end because he got his client off and whatever. It's no, there's still, he knows what it's like because he's dealt with this thing with his sister for his whole life, and it's not. She won't be in a physical prison, but there will be a mental prison.
There'll be scar tissue. Yeah.
Yeah. She's going to have to deal with that. And I don't know. I thought it was interesting that he kind of noted that. But he makes a point to talk about that John Tester Jr. was there and he made nary a peep during the trial, which, as we all know, the last time they saw each other was when he beat the crap out of him at his house, when Joe beat the crap out of John Tester Jr. at his house, which, if you remember in the at the end of the episode or the beginning of the episode, after that whole situation happened, I was kind of shocked that there were no repercussions for that. We're about to find out what those repercussions
are. It's a slow burn.
Yeah. So he never heard from John Tester Jr. again. He's kind of wondering as he leaves, it's weird that he didn't say anything. Am I going to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?
20 pounds, like John Tester had gained. So he's not
and he's
doing real great.
Right. So Joe's he's man, am I going to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder because of this guy that he, but I think to some degree he's I wouldn't mind some closure. Well, the closure he's about to experience is probably not what he wanted, but he walks, he decides not to go through the lobby because he doesn't want to run into John Tester Jr. or, any of the prosecution and just make it awkward and cause a scene. So he and Caroline exit through a side door and down the stairs to the parking lot, and they're greeted by John Tester Jr. with a revolver in his hand. And this is where this turns into an action thriller for about 10 pages, where you're what is happening? They are fleeing, there are guns, there's hiding,
well, it's so
there's
weird
all sorts of stuff.
It's happening in a setting that we've walked so many times, that courthouse right off the main street of Jonesboro, that court or that
I was thinking that same
parking
thing.
lot. I could just picture it. We walked there when you got married, a few months ago.
No, so that whole courthouse where that scene goes down is less than 10 minutes from where we sit right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It's just wild.
Well, Dylan got married there. What?
Last year.
Yeah, 6 to 8 months ago.
Yeah.
Like in that courthouse, we parked there where the scene takes place. Like we walked to Main Street, like to go up into the little, it's just funny reading this, like picturing that setting, you know?
Yeah, it's very idyllic. But yeah, the, as far as Tester was concerned, we all knew, like, because it was building towards this. It starts out, he's kind of, the truck is popping up and he's following the family and he's following Dillard, and then he puts him into the lake, and then just, it escalates. And this was the crescendo. This was absolutely the high point.
Well, and so but Caroline's with him, right? So like every time John Tester has been, it's not been, nobody else has been in danger, but now Caroline is in danger, and this is like big time. Like he's shooting at them. So they make a run for it through the cars in the parking lot. Like they're trying to hide and duck and like all this stuff. But I mean, you can only do that for so long. And so Joe decides, like, he's after me. He's not after you. And for your safety, like, we need to split up. And so he tells Caroline, he's like, you run that way. I'm running this way. Go get help. And she's like, what? No, don't leave me. And he's like, no, go. And he just takes off running, right? So he makes a run for it, and he totally gets shot in the leg. And I was like shocked. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, he actually shot at him. Like, it was like, I'm like, I didn't know what to do with it. And he almost gets taken out by Tester Jr. altogether. But as we know, there are, 8 other books in the series. So I had high hopes that was not going to be the case. And he is saved by none other than Sarge Hurley from the beginning of the book, which is such a great turnaround. And I loved his line. He says, my geriatric guardian angel, and I died. I was like, that is such a great line. Because we talked about everything coming full circle, but I'm like, it's literally everything. Like, it's like even that tiniest little detail of the guy that he talks to at the beginning of the book that he walks in, like we talked about, in episode 1 about how he knows everybody and talks to everybody as he's walking through the courthouse. He's made all these friends over the years. And I'm like, and then it's Sarge Hurley that comes to save him. And I was like, that's so great. It's not some random, it could have been anybody. But I love that it's the old guy from the beginning of the book. And I was like, that's so great. It's a different, for me, reading it. I mean, it's similar, I guess, into the scene where he goes to John Tester Jr.'s house and scares him and beats him up and stuff. But for some reason, this felt really, really different than any other chapter in the book. Like, it felt, I don't know, I was anxious. It was like stress-inducing. And I don't know if it's because it's like in like broad daylight and like there's like Caroline's an innocent bystander, and that there's probably like people walking around on sidewalks. Like there's
I kept
something
thinking,
like
I was like, don't lead them toward the street.
Yeah. Well, because it's when it gets kind of towards the end, there's like people, there's like random civilians just like walking around.
Yeah.
So I think there was like a stress level with this chapter that, well, and I think you just know. You know what Joe did in the middle of the book to John Tester Jr., and now you know how crazy John Tester Jr. is and that he's out for blood. And so it's like, and he's defenseless. I mean, Joe Dillard's defenseless in this moment. So, there was like a very real fear associated with this. So it did feel very like, I don't know what the word is. I can't figure out the word to describe it, but just kind of like panic inducing, I guess would be like a good word to use. Yeah.
It was a very anxious scene. And, one thing that was interesting to me is, so Dad, I'm pretty sure when he was in the military, got shot in the leg, but not like,
really?
Yeah, but it wasn't like a full on, like it was a ricochet. Do you remember that?
Wasn't it
in his shin? Yeah.
Wow, so weird. Didn't remember that till now.
Yeah, so that was my thought. Is like Dad knows what that feels like. Because
which makes sense.
Yeah, because
he's written a lot of other stuff he knows.
Yeah, no, he got hit with a ricochet. I actually had totally forgotten this. Like I had
really?
Yeah, this scene it completely, of all the scenes in the book, this one had completely vanished from my mind. Like when I was reading this, I actually felt like I was reading it for the first time, and I don't know why.
Really?
Yeah, it was weird because I've read this book, between editing it and just going back through it. So I've read it at least a dozen times, probably more.
I think it's partially just picturing your father in that situation, like you don't want to, and your mother.
True.
Like running away from a gunman.
Yeah, you got to keep in mind
fair.
when Cody and I are reading these books, we're not seeing these fictional characters. We're seeing our family members do these things.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild. But yeah, I had forgotten. I knew there was a sort of. I knew there was a Genesis. I remember that with the Tester Junior sort of B story, but I'd forgotten that. Oh wow! No, that he really showed up with a gun. I forgot about that.
He's there.
And then Sarge's liver spotted hands come over
I love
top
that
of
it.
it.
Mentions the massive liver spotted.
Yeah.
You just picture him, and it was so my head. One of the funniest things to me in this chapter, which it wasn't a funny chapter, but it was just very real, is I just pictured Mom's voice when they're running, and she goes, "He's gonna kill us, Joe." I could just see Mom running with him going, "Scott, he's gonna kill us. Like, what are we gonna do?"
The Mom,
oh my
I
gosh.
could just hear it.
There really was a sense of panic and anxiety in that scene. I mean, it was, like you said, I was just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. I had forgotten. I'd forgotten he showed up with a gun, and oh my gosh, he actually shot Joe. This is nuts.
Well, and it's crazy too because if you're holding the physical copy of the book, there's not that many pages left, and so you're like, oh, he's walking out of the courtroom, everything's gonna be resolved, and they're like, wait, what? Hold on,
yeah.
There's not enough pages left to resolve this. Yeah, I know. It is kind of, I don't know. It's a nice little twist there at the end where you're like. I thought everything was over and everything was fine, and it is kind of that. I don't know, but I think it's interesting because I had that thought after he went and beat up and scared John Tester Jr. I'm like, is he not going to reap any thing that he sows in this scene? This is not okay, but I get why he's doing it. And then it's yep, nope, this was the comeuppance of that. He sat on it. He just didn't retaliate right away.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of bring that full circle as well, which I appreciated. And in the last chapter, which might be my favorite chapter in the whole book.
Yeah,
because
great.
We've been talking about the whole time on this podcast how much we love Erlene.
And she's a genius.
She's a genius, and you have no idea how big of a genius Erlene is until you get to this last chapter, and you're like, you get to the end of the book, and you're like, Erlene has been holding all of the cards this entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's arrested just 2 days later because they get the test results back from the Corvette. She wants to meet with Joe Dillard. He's on crutches because of the gunshot. You basically find out that she set everything up. All of the witnesses in the case that testified to seeing her places, so the guy on the bridge, all these things that these anonymous callers,
woman that called,
She was standing beside her,
Yeah, all these tips that have called in,
well, and
to
all those
Agent
vague
Landers.
scenes in her strip club where you were like, what is she doing? Because it would say when she was talking to Virgil or when she had the lawyer that she needed advice, but it never said what she was doing. It was so vague.
Yeah, and she tipped off Landers to the location of the Corvette. Everything she did. And I literally was like, oh my gosh, she laid a trap for Agent Landers based on the Fourth Amendment, where none of that evidence would be admissible in court because he was trespassing without a warrant. She had a guy crouching down in the woods filming everything. I'm like, she literally thought of everything. She thought of everything. She's been pulling all of the strings. And then she literally is like, the good twist of everything is that she then asks Joe to be her lawyer, and you're like, oh my gosh, Erlene is his first innocent client.
No, I love that part. That she is the innocent client.
Mind blown, like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It was so good.
The most uninnocent woman in the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, you're just like, oh my gosh, because then you're like, well, that's weird because, it's unfortunate that Angel wasn't technically innocent because the book is called An Innocent Client, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh my gosh, he does get an innocent client.
Yeah.
It's freaking Erlene Barlow. It's like, it's so
I love
good.
the part where they just lose it. Where he's just like, he realizes what a genius she is, and he's just hysterical. And she just starts cracking up too. And it's great.
Yeah. And it's a great last line too. I think, what's the last line? It's like, it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just that was, like you said, just that really deep, like warm, fuzzy feeling,
Yeah.
when you finish a good book. Like that was how I felt. Same thing. That chapter's, you're right. That's the best chapter in the book. She's
because it's so like, it's so good. Like everything that's built, like we've been talking about it throughout the whole podcast of like, man, she's up to something. Like there's so much left unsaid. Like you read these chapters and it's like she went to talk to this guy and then end of chapter and you're like, well, what the heck was that conversation? And like it's so perfect that the reveal is at the very end. And it really is just like the cherry on top. Like the book would have still been good even without that kind of like, but it's like, it just like takes it to this next level. And I literally was like sitting there and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to Dylan and Cody about this. It's amazing. Like I was like dying. I was like, you need to see my notes. It just says in all caps, Erlene is his first innocent client. Mind blown. Like I literally was like, oh my gosh. Like it's such a good twist.
Well,
I was
and
like,
she's
it's
still
so great.
just the way she talks, like even after everything, she's telling him all her genius. She says one of my favorite things in it. I don't remember what it was, but it was something about, well, bust my shiny buttons. It was something about her shiny, or I don't know. I just loved it so much. But she still almost acts like these things just happened. Well, I maybe told somebody that something needed to be done about Julie, and they just misinterpreted it. Like she still
doesn't really confess to anything. Like she's just kind of like, like
I'm a criminal mastermind, but whoops.
Yeah, it was so good. I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. She is the villain you love to hate. Like you can't. She's such a well-written character that you're just like, oh my gosh, like I kind of want a spin-off series of Erlene's dealings.
Yeah.
I think you guys should make this happen.
Should just become the mafia head of the South.
Yeah, she is. She's not in every book, but she definitely.
She comes back, doesn't she?
Oh yeah, she's in a couple of the other books where she plays a relatively prominent role. None as much as this one. Like this is her. This book was her masterpiece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But she's definitely in other books. I think at least 2, maybe 3 other books. 3 other books.
She makes some appearances. Nice. Yeah. You know, what's that show, The Queen of the Something, where it's like about the drug lord?
Queen of the South.
Queen of the South. I feel like you could do a spinoff series about Erlene Barlow where she turns into the...
I'm telling you, if you're looking for new material, a prequel series of how Erlene and her late husband
Erlene and Gus
got to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that you know what? That actually is a brilliant idea. I had not thought about that. She's unique. I don't know that I've ever read or seen a character like her. You know?
Yeah.
Because there are a million tropes out there. You've seen, here's this character again, just with a little bit of different dress up or whatever. But she was just completely unique.
She's like a drug lord Dolly Parton. You know?
Yeah, no, she does. She does have some Dolly Parton vibes going. Yeah. Wow, you just blew my mind just now.
No offense to Dolly, we all know you're not a drug lord.
Yeah, no, she's a saint. You got to be careful if you're talking
a saint,
around.
Dolly,
talking.
but
yeah, you can't just be throwing Dolly Parton's name around.
I know, but she is kind of like that vibe.
She's like
though.
royalty in Tennessee. How could you even say that?
You know what I mean.
Yeah.
I would never.
That's hilarious. Well, I had so much fun reading this book. I can't wait to crack open the second one.
This has been a fun go around, but
yes, and thank you for bearing with us, as this is our first time doing anything like this.
No, you guys are great. I think it's been fun for me to read it through with fresh eyes, having never read it. But it's fun to hear the stories that you guys have, and kind of in real time as we're reading it. So hopefully the listeners have enjoyed that as well. Maybe it's inspired them to pick up the book again and read it, or if they haven't, to go get it and read it and start reading the series so that you can listen to the rest of the podcast with us and we won't have to do spoiler alerts because you have read the books.
Yes, that would be good.
So that's the goal, right? So be sure to pick up the second book before we start the next section of the podcast, and we'll be back with the first part of In Good Faith.